Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Morley, and this is the IT Business Partner Playbook, a unique series where I'm joined every week by business partners and business relationship managers from around the globe. In this series, we unpack the real stories, the quiet breakthroughs, the tough lessons that shape these roles. If you're ready to grow and reflect and lead with intention, then you've come to the right place. Before we jump into today's conversation, I've got two quick asks. First, if you've got any thoughts or ideas or feedback about the podcast, I'd love to hear them, whether it's in the comments or directly to me. Your input really helps shape the kinds of conversations that we have here. So if there's any topic you want us to dig into, then please let me know. And then the second thing is, if you're finding value in these episodes, please hit the subscribe button and give this episode a thumbs up. It just helps us reach more people, grow the community, and ultimately offer more guidance. So, on to today's episode, and I'm delighted to be joined by Shellie Bowman, a BRM in the US. Shellie spent just over 3 years in the role, which was quite a direction change from previous roles. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So good morning to you, Shellie. Thanks so much for joining me. Can I hand over to you for a quick introduction before we take a look at your journey here and discuss what business partnering means to you?
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Mark. Um, you know, it, and I'm a pretty simple guy. My name is Shellie Bowman, a recently graduated doctor. So, if you want to be formal, it's Dr. Shellie. But nonetheless, I'm a master BRM. My trajectory spans everything from government relations, public administration, still doing strategic partnering with IT.
So, as I mentioned, you've had quite a varied career history. So, what led you to become a BRN? Did you even know about the role before you moved into it?
I didn't, not formally from a title perspective. The name is quite interesting, BRM, which I found spans across different industries. So when I seen the name Business Relationship Manager, what stuck out to me was relationships, and it drew my attention. But when I look back on, just kind of reflecting on my journey, I realized I'd have been doing the work, before I earned the title for quite a long time. And so what drew me there was an opportunity with my former employer, who was looking for a business relationship manager. And what I learned during that time was just how important the synergy between the business and IT can be. And so that was, kind of what really led me into rolling my sleeves up and really getting involved in the BRM world.
And you said your previous employer had introduced you to that role. What role were they in themselves? The person that kind of sponsored the BRM role.
So the role itself was a business relationship manager, and we worked in between a business unit as well as the global IT department, and it was truly a BRM role. Prior to that, my previous former role was in between business. It was in between the business as well as IT, and so and so that went back another maybe about 4 years. So in total, there was about 7-8 years of doing the work, but the last three and a half were actually under the title as a BRM.
Okay. And how were you perceived by your business colleagues and your IT colleagues? Did they understand the role? Did they understand what you were, trying to help them with?
No, interestingly enough, I had, this is a direct quote. He'll remain nameless. When I first, was onboarded with my former employer, I said, tell me about your experience. I just kind of did a listening tour and said, tell me about your experience with the organization's BRMs. And quote, close quote, the individual said the BRMs are quite lawless. And I took that, I was a bit taken aback with that turn. And then as times kind of, as things kind of evolved, I was able to put some context around to what he was implying. And so what I learned was there was very little understanding of the BRM role in that organization, which then later I found that was kind of a widespread thing within enterprises, that, there's no real, framed understanding of what a BRM does. And so I began to understand the positives and the negatives associated with that kind of loose understanding. because in my experience, I found that BRMs, although we are those who understand the strategy and the value of IT intertwined or converged into that strategy, we also have to be, intellectually curious to find the problems and to bring unconventional solutions to those problems, utilizing the resources. And I think, because we know problems tend to spur throughout the strategic trajectory, it kind of gives the impression that BRMs are individuals who don't work within a set framework, and it's kind of corporate behavior to put everything into a framework. So I think that's where a little bit of that misunderstanding originates.
That's a rough title to call them lawless. I mean, I can totally understand from many BRMs that we've spoken to. I think directionless would be maybe more fair, because a lot of BRMs try to kind of feel their way. They try to figure out what it is that they can do for the business. They kind of understand, what a good BRM might be. They don't often have the direction, the executive sponsorship to say, look, this is your place within the organization. This is what people expect of you, and this is what you can expect of other people. And so this is the role you're playing. So I think it's a lot of BRMs probably feel that they don't have the direction. As I say, lawless is probably a bit of a bit tough. I totally understand. But how did you feel? Because I say this often, but if you have the right executive sponsorship, if you set the scene correctly, then a lot of these problems for BRMs just go away.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you have the executive sponsorship? Were there, senior business people and senior IT people that understood where you fit, what your role was?
In my experience there, and I can kind of give is a twofold answer to that. In my experience there, I felt we had the intent of the executive sponsorship, but in the executive sponsorship themselves weren't really fully understood of what the BRM capability was to the overarching strategy, and so in fairness to our executives, they too were trying to figure out their place in the multi-demanded strategy the business had. So, and this is me speaking to my prior employer. Moving forward, I'm self-employed. I have a business now. And so and before, I stood up my business as I was working through my doctorate program. And so I gave a lot of thought, because I wanted to truly converge my skill set as a BRM into what I did, my academic work. And so I had, and I had to, kind of give grace to my former executives, because I now understand the complexity, what they had to figure out. So I've had to, on my own figure out, as a business owner as well as a practitioner, where is this place? And beyond that question, not being permanently attached to this enterprise. And so when I was able to sit with that, I said, okay, this place is truly in alignment with the business's strategy, but we have to have clear sight lines to the strategic gaps as it pertains to the tech resources and the demands moving forward along that strategic trajectory. If we can do that, then I believe the BRMs in any setting would be okay, because of the relationship between IT and the business or the enterprise in of itself. But if we are not positioned where we can't see the gaps along that strategic trajectory, then we're always going to be trying to figure out what is it that we should be doing.
Yeah. Were you part of a BRM team, or were you the only BRM?
I was part of a team.
Okay.
Yeah, I was part of a quite massive team in comparison to my experience with other organizations of BRM.
Okay. And how was it split geographically or by vertical, or how did they allocate BRMs within the business?
The BRMs were allocated by business units. So throughout the enterprise, you would have, a vertical assignment, which aligned to geographical regions around the globe. So, in my instance, I manage the relationship between the Asia Pacific realm, as well as some of the North America's Canada, and then there was a vertical that I managed as well, which was the research and learning. So it was a little bit of a mixed kind of discipline in terms of the allocations, and that was the underpinnings of that was predicated on how the products were being utilized across the enterprise.
Right. And do you find, because a big part of being a BRM is obviously the business intelligence, business IQ, they call it, get to know what the business needs and where they're heading. Did you find that that was more or less difficult in certain locations or certain business units?
I would say the degree of difficulty that came with that was the lack of understanding of the BRM value when the BRM understands that. And so there were some business units I worked with who I literally had to sell my way in to be able to get a glimpse of the strategy, and then find some low-hanging fruit or some easy wins to say, hey, look, based on what I was able to read, looking at your prescribed roadmaps here, I see the demand as well as the shortfalls that could come in the very near future if you execute like this. And so I had to build my own use cases to bring, in the form of evidence to say, here's what I would, strongly recommend. Not necessarily designing the solution, but at the very least, looking at it from a theoretical standpoint to say we should at least engage in this conversation with these individuals and with these individual stakeholders inside of the IT department.
Then there must have done a lot to build your credibility within those departments.
Yeah, it really did. It took a while, to be able to do that because, especially if, the way my team was comprised, we had individuals who were just kind of appointed to the BRM team who had a lot of history within the organization. So, there was a little less, having to know individuals or getting to know individuals or to lay the land within the organization. Whereas myself and a couple of other BRMs who came, we had no insight as to who was who or any of the key players. So not only just trying to figure out how to do BRM within this organization, we also had to figure out, from a stakeholder perspective, who's who, their level of influence, and what's what, considering we have to influence without authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, when you first moved into that role, was the role, were there other people that are kind of already established in it, and was there like a baseline of what you were doing, how your plan of attack, or was it all kind of new and had to develop?
The job, interestingly, the job description in of itself and the baseline was that of a senior program manager.
Right.
Closely aligned with the PMO. So, as a BRM, you can see where those problems began in the beginning. And so that's where we had to spend a lot of time fighting what we weren't going to do, because if we so engulfed in these, activities, then what we should be doing is going to get missed. And it's going to devalue the capability on paper, because while these things are being missed, which are the things that we ought to have been doing, these other areas, are going to be reinforced by additional workforce, the BRMs to the PMO.
Yeah. So did you, because I know you've been through MBRMs, you've done, you've studied a lot of the kind of the text and the best practice. Did you find a lot of that was useful, and did you do that as a team to give you kind of that foundation, that starting point for all of you to then build on?
No. It's interesting because when I discovered the actual credential trajectory for BRM, the BRMP, C, then an M, what I did, I stumbled upon that because I wanted to find some type of structure that could give me insight as to this very tech forward role that's actually framed in this. It's not a loose title. You're an account executive, which we call a BRM. You're truly this role, and here's the expectation. Being someone with a project management background, I could see the similarities, but I can also see where they were dissimilar. And I knew if we played to the similarities, then we would be putting ourselves and that we were going down a rabbit hole that we wouldn't be fruitful in with regard to the requirements of our role.
Yeah.
And so when I sought out to find something, and then I found the Institute, which then allowed me to just kind of get a formalized framework within which I could work. Now, here's where it got interesting to your question. We had some BRMs by role that were completely against any formalized understanding of the role per the Institute, who then were in a position of a little more influence because of their tenure within the organization. So we always had this dueling narrative, like, these individuals, myself and some of us who came a little late, little later in the business, we don't need that. This is how we can do it. And it was those 6 words that I detest. This is the way we've always done it. And that's like, okay. So we kind of had a little bit of that. And so we had some of us who were, BRMPs and CBRMs and so forth and so on, where we had others who just didn't give a rat's behind about any type of credentials. So that was kind of, if you can imagine what that created within the team.
Yeah, I imagine that was pretty difficult. But we've seen that it's kind of a double-edged sword, because having those certifications does give you a nice base level, so that you understand the role better, understand kind of what it could be, and if you do certain things, then there's obviously a lot of potential for it. But then I guess sometimes it can give you ideas that just are not going to work within an organization, because you have to kind of work within the environment. So we have seen it where people have done the training, come away with a million great ideas, but then come to a roadblock because it's just the organization's not fit for that. They work a different way. So you're never going to be able to kind of take on all of this stuff that you've learned. But at the same time, I do definitely see the value in it, and it's disappointing when people aren't open to learning new things, because it's just, if things have been done the way they have, forever, they're never going to improve, are they? So it's challenging when you have that mentality.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because you're 100% correct in terms of my experience and the experiences that I've come to learn speaking with my colleagues. It's interesting because just because you've earned a certain credential in any capacity, it doesn't give you all of the answers for everything that should come about. But the one thing that I would like to promulgate to any BRM, just looking if they on that trajectory or thinking about it, and if you don't maintain the credentials, if by chance you should happen to collaborate with someone who does, is the point you just made. It establishes a good foundation within which you can begin the ideation process of anything, and truly, it's a brand that instills a little bit of confidence to the stakeholders. If you don't know me, but at the very least you say, okay, this person's a master BRM or CBRM or what have you. At the very minimum, if you don't know who Shellie Bowman is, Shellie Bowman is familiar with some of the ideals of being a business relationship manager. If there was nothing there and you don't know me, then we would have to spend a little more time for you to even establish a basis of operational trust, and trust being the basis of any relationship that we know.
And I think this is one of the problems that BRMs had, is that a lot of the people that they're working with, they're in established roles. You've got project managers, you've got, people they're in doing jobs that everyone knows about. You don't have to explain what a project manager does because it's been around so long. Whereas you have a BRM that is, I guess, still a fairly new role.
Yeah.
So it is, having that credential is a good way, as you say, of kind of establishing that you know what you're talking about, even if no one else does. So but it kind of helps level the playing field, because you've got people that have, and all of these other professions, they all have credentials, they all have things that people can recognize. And so this gives you, I think, a way to level the playing field.
Yes, I agree.
So have you, while you were in your role, were there things that you found that, there were like light bulb moments that, wow, this is really working, we need to replicate this, we've seen what someone's doing, we need to do the same thing? Were there things did you change much in your approach to BRM, business partnering?
I did. Not from an operational perspective, but from a functional perspective, meaning I had to, my approach had to be selfishly top down. My background, I'm former military, so I respect hierarchy, organizational hierarchy. And so, you come in at wherever you come in, whether it be base ground level, mid-level, senior level, wherever I come in, I respect that. So if I come in and new on a team, I'm looking and I'd say, hey, look, I don't want to, supersede or go beyond my invited threshold. Well, I feel as though, and what I had to on board is, as a BRM, to be successful in any engagement, you must get as high as you can in whatever organization,
Right.
and begin there, and let it begin with the relationship. Beyond just looking at strategy, we're not going to talk value, we're not going to talk trust. What we're going to talk about is you and I. Because at a very minimum, if you have an inkling of understanding of who I am as a professional, and you can trust in my ability, fundamentals. Shellie says he's going to do something, I can trust that he's going to do it. If I send Shellie an email, he's going to read it. If I ask for a response back, he's going to give me a response back. If I learned fundamentally, if you can establish yourself in that space as high up as you possibly can, then things become a little more, I don't want to say easier, but a little more navigable when it comes time to really address the issues that we're trained to see in operational organizational strategies.
Right. You mentioned the military there, and you've had some really, varied roles. Are there any lessons that you've learned from any of those other roles you've done that have kind of really helped you do what you're doing now?
Yeah. Something that I tell myself a lot is to fail successfully. And I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but here's what it means to me. If you're going to fail knowing you've given your all to what you were supposed to have been doing. And if it doesn't work, at the very minimum, you can back away knowing that it wasn't because it was a lack of anything, or it was something that went against your integrity, or something along those lines. The failure truly came because the square could not fit in the circle. That's something that I take away from my career trajectory up to this point, and I have to apply it, and that's what helps me with perseverance. That's what helps me with being able to be resilient, because as BRMs, we're not always gonna get it right.
Yeah.
A lot of it is abstract work. We see something, we align what we see, a value leaker, something that's going to hurt that, not necessarily position that organization in its optimum position from a business result standpoint. And, we see it, but we have to come up with something in our brain. There's no guidebook that says,
Yeah.
Here's this, then this. This is all where it comes from. And so if you find yourself in a situation to where you are afraid or apprehensive about getting something wrong, then you might not show up as the best professional as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's it. I see the point. Have there been any challenges, any problems that you've had as a BRM that are just kind of stand out? There were things that haunted your dreams, or things that you just couldn't get past, or anything that you can, that thing standing up?
The overarching question: what is it that you do?
Right.
That, especially early on as a BRM, I look at it twofold. I look at it when I was part of a BRM team in an enterprise, kind of a traditional setting. And then I look at from where I am now, and so what is it that you do? What it haunted me because I knew that question was preceded with a bit of prejudgment. Here I am. I'm a business unit general manager. Something like a CEO, if you would, and I'm asking you, what do you do? My mind and that of my colleagues, because we've had this question over coffee, which coffee before whiskey, what the hell, and we know that question comes by way of a desire. This person wants, they desire a certain professional in the room.
Right.
And so you want to answer to match what this person wants.
Yes.
And so that was always very difficult for me until I got to a place in my operating my own practice to where what I do is what I do. And what I do for your organization is going to bring the best amount of value because I've done my research. I know what your organization is. I know its challenges. I have to, and that's one of the things that I encourage a lot of BRMs to do. Despite the whole role clarity challenges that we as BRMs face, despite that daunting question, what is it that you do in the middle of the boardroom and everyone is looking at you?
Yeah.
Do your own due diligence as much as you possibly can to find the problems, because where problems lurk, solutions capture ears.
Yeah, that's nice. We've spoken about challenges, but are there any standout successes where you've worked with the business or worked with IT and you've kind of achieved something that maybe was unachievable before? Is there anything that stands out for you?
Yes. A lot of it comes around finance, operational finance. As a BRM, I think it's truly imperative that we understand the dollars and cents, because dollars and cents, that's the language of business. I remember going through undergrad and my education in accounting. I was always understood that accounting is the language of business. If you can make the money make sense, then you're okay. And so the success is one of my business units. They had an issue, a finance issue. Their budgets were very, strained. Their decision making was constrained. There was a lot of, requirements from a point of being able to comply with regulations, but they couldn't make the decisions that they needed because they didn't have the budget. And so I said, okay, how can I bring value to this situation? And it came, and I was made aware of this because of the relationship that I had with the CTO. CTO came and said, "Hey, Shellie, can we talk?" He was out of Australia. And I remember having a conversation. It was probably 10, 11 o'clock p.m. my time, which was sometime in the morning their time. And we had this long conversation. And I said, "Look, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to indulge in something." And he had his coffee and I had my whiskey, and we was talking. But that was probably one of the most successful and best conversations that came out. We didn't talk tech. We didn't talk, the latest and greatest, sophisticated, cutting edge developments in the IT spectrum. What we spoke about was what really kept him up, and the CEO challenged him, and that was we need to increase our profits by 2%. If we can do that, then we'll be able to make up some of these compliance inroads and proceed and push the B forward. I said, okay. So when he shared that with me, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at everything this business unit spends money on. And so I began looking at running costs and within the infrastructure. And I started to see this kind of, understanding behavior. IT folks are very intelligent at what it is IT folks do, but they're not necessarily looking at cash flow statements, P&L, or what have you. And so understanding that, we started to look at running costs, and I found a slew of double running costs. I'm like, oh crap, let's bring these people together and see where we can pull things back, where we can turn, machines off, just kind of look at it from a different behavior. And so what that ended up doing, we weren't able to get directly to 2%, but just kind of having those types of conversations, I want to say we were able to increase it by maybe like 1 1/3 or some odd percent, which was great because there was money to be able to start to drive some more efficient operation.
Yeah.
And created a slight strategy shift, but there was some predictable value, monetarily value for the future.
That's wonderful. I mean, it must have done a hell of a lot for the credibility of the BRM team in general, and in your relationship with that person. I mean, there's obviously come to you much faster in the future, knowing that you're going to be able to, understand what it is that their pressures. This was something we've not really spoken about it on many of the episodes before, but this is something actually in the last episode with Sahil. He mentioned that everyone talks about business IQ. But you got to understand, the pain points for business and be able to follow the money. Where a business trying to make money, where they're trying to save money, and really have that mindset. So it's okay to have, an idea of a strategy and what you're trying to do, what you're kind of trying to deliver to the customers. But you've really got to be thinking financially. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because it's obviously something. It's definitely not going to be typical amongst IT people that they're that concerned about finances, and the business has obviously got their own own things that they're thinking about. So again, the BRM is able to stand above, have a holistic view and spend a bit more time looking at, these levers that can be pulled. So it's interesting you said that, and it's a wonderful victory that you had there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Was that a success that you were able to share with people, that, to make sure that this victory was part of BRM, and so you could kind of blow your trumpet, make other people aware of you more?
Yeah, we were able to, brought it back to the team, and in fact, the CTO, he wrote up a beautiful letter, and kind of a letter of accommodation, and thanked the team, and particularly the BRM that was in charge of that business unit, which happened to be me. And so it was really good. But for me, I'm always thinking, from a standpoint of learning, how can we leverage this to help the BRM community? Because I know the difficulties. I know what it can look like. It can be quite daunting for some BRMs in certain organization settings. And so when I remember getting beginning that role, there was so much emphasis on tech. And you have to understand tech. I believe you must understand tech from a theoretical and a framework perspective. You could go, where things work, so that way you can align it to the strategy, but you don't have to, be the one who is the architect, the engineers, or what have you. You have experts in those spaces for reasons. But it was never emphasized the importance of understanding the monetary flow of money from a business perspective. The term BRM, I like to tell people, especially those with whom I speak, who's thinking about this, business is the first word for a reason.
Right.
And you should prioritize that when you are looking at, your KPIs as a professional. If you're looking at, being measured to see if whether you're doing the job effectively from a positive perspective, then that business needs to be able to say your KPIs match our KPIs.
Right.
If my KPIs don't align with that business's by way of bringing value, whether it be monetary value, defined value, if the company or the business says, hey, look, we're okay financially, but we want to increase our reputation, then that's where you need to shift and say, okay, well, we can frame out, what that translates into monetarily, but we know the value measurement is going to be community or social reputation as opposed to that. So that's what I really took from that, was being able to just kind of pay it forward and to cement that in how I practice as a BRM now.
Yeah. Do you think, because BRMs are people, as I said before, they're you need to be a bit of a social animal. You need to be able to, obviously build relationships with people. Do you think that BRMs are in a really good position to impact the organizational culture? Because this is something I think is obviously has a big impact on the way organizations operate is their culture. But I think BRMs are in a good position to impact that. Is that something you've experienced or you believe?
You are speaking my language, sir. Yeah, yes. And interestingly enough, that was my research was around organizational culture.
Okay.
And I had, I got the question from two sides of the equation is how in the world does organizational culture align with public administration and being a BRM? And that's what kind of kept me up at night, trying to figure one out. But it really does, because one of the tenets of being a BRM is being an extremely effective, powerful communicator. It's being able to communicate up the ladder, down the ladder, and at each side of the rung. And you have to do that effectively to establish the means of being able to influence. And so we know culture is crafted around how individuals communicate with each other, which then creates the harmony and overarching narrative. And so as a BRM, if you can get in there and you're agile, you're the one who can go to the very technical techies of the organization, as well as the suits, as you say, and you bridge that gap. And if you can do that and you can do it well, you can take two groups of individuals at the extreme ends of the spectrum to include all those that make up the rest of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And essentially change their paradigms of one another to a point of everyone is looking in the same direction. So in order to do that, you have to be a little more, you have to go the extra mile. You have to be a little attentive to what's being said about each other within an organization. Because no matter what changes or solutions you bring about to an organization, to an enterprise, to a small organization, to a mom and pop, no matter what you bring technically, if there's no people harmony, then it's still going to fall apart. The strategy is going to be busted, because no matter how good that strategy is and it's propelling that organization forward, and you can see it forecastable into God knows how far, if the people inside are disjointed, just not kind to one another, they don't have to be buddies, but just have to treat people respectable, then you have a problem. So I think I fervently believe, and I take this and I own this, when I go into any organization, I'm mindful of that. I'm mindful to how leaders treat each other as well as their subordinates. And that's why my company is Elite Coaching and Consulting, because before we could even begin consulting, we might have some opportunities in which we can coach, and that coaching, can be the difference between having technical success or organizational success.
Right. Just on that, on the connection, because I've found one thing that BRMs don't typically talk about doing often, although they might do it, is not only building their own relationships, but building other people's. So you have a one-to-one with someone, but if you can build a relationship elsewhere in the business, so that you no longer have to be a part of it, I think that's something that helps build that culture and makes BRM become a capability rather than a role. That other people in the organization can have that. Is that something you spent much time doing as your life as a BRM, just trying to help connect other people?
Yes, that's it. In fact, that's the power of the credentials, because even early on, one of the tenets of a BRM is being a connector. It's the person who says, okay, you need A and B and you need C and D. Well, each of these people have what both of you need. So let's facilitate a relationship here, and then the BRM is able to remove him or herself from that relationship, but you still are able to manage it. And see, that's the key, because if you can pull them together on the basis of what each other needs and each other can provide for one another, and you're doing your job to manage that, you will see where it begins to ebb and flow. And so that connection will do nothing but get stronger and stronger, which then will propel the organization. You must do that as a BRM, I believe.
Yeah. Did you work with people? We often talk about what BRM should have, as personal skills, as abilities, as characteristics. Did you ever work with BRMs where you thought to yourself, actually, I don't think this is for you. You don't have the right character. You're not, the thick skin. It's just, obviously BRMs have to be certain types of people and not all people are like that. Did you ever work with anyone or know anyone that just you thought that this is not for you? And what was it that kind of prompted you to think that way?
Yeah, I did. There was a person who she worked with the BRM team, but she wasn't a said BRM. But she had an opportunity to go on and study, and she became a BRM. She earned a BRMP and started doing the work, but she second guessed herself a lot. And we all do that. There's time in which we say, man, should we have done that? Should we?
Yeah.
But when you make a decision, you should think critically, assess, analyze, and then decide. And whatever that process may be for the person, and you should decide with enough conviction so you can take that decision and give it or present it in such a way that you can stand on that. And that's where she didn't have that about her. And she was a very sweetheart, nice person, but we would have conversations. I mean, one-on-ones, and she would just, like, and I think, it's okay. And she said it herself, it didn't take me to say, she goes, I don't know if I want to do this job. And I feel sorry for you BRMs who have to do it, because every day is not a rainy day. Every day is not a rainbow sunny day. Yeah. And I explained to her, I said, yeah, that's the one thing about being someone who does not, or being in a role that doesn't give you a guidebook by which you can say, I'm going to refer back to this. These are truly your decisions based on the facts that revolve. And so if you don't feel comfortable in bringing the bringing the not so great news, but only the great news, this might be for you. And so she really, she reconsidered her thinking. And last I spoke to her, she said, I'll maintain my credibility, my credentials, but what I'm not going, I don't want to take on that role full time, because just as a person. And I understood that. And so, and I know that, to your point, I know there's a lot of people in the world that struggle with that, just being the bearer or the deliverer of bad news, because who wants to be the jerk to walk in and say, no, I'm not going to work.
Yeah,
but it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because I've often said that when we first got involved with business partners and BRMs, I just really enjoyed it, because it was just 9 times out of 10, they're really great people to work with. So when we were doing training or consulting, whatever it was, they were just nice people to work with. And I kind of got to thinking that, that was one of the characteristics of a BRM. They just need to be easygoing and easy, good to get along with. But, the more I talk to people, the more you hear, that's not, it needs to go beyond that, because it's okay being, a good person and relaxed and easygoing. Excuse me. You have to have that thick skin. There has to be that other side to you. You have to be able to influence. You need to have some power behind you. You need to, have conviction, as you said. You need to be able to make a decision and stick to it. So I think, I guess maybe I was a bit naive, where I thought that, just nice people can be BRMs.
You're not by yourself. I was there once.
Yeah. It's not just that, because I've been in meetings where the nice people just get chewed up and spat out, and it's not nice. So I think people that are moving into a BRM role or business partner role do need to be aware of that it's going to be, and the thing is, it's also often a thankless task. I mean, as we've discussed, these people that have these established roles, people know what to expect from you, and you have a deliverable often, you have something you can put your finger on. But business partners and BRMs often don't. They're always helping other people achieve goals, so they don't often get the thanks. So you don't get the thanks on one end, but you do get beaten with a stick on the other end. So it's it could be a challenging role.
Yeah. It's interesting that I love how you point out partner. That's the other component that I feel is important for BRMs to truly embrace, is that of a partner. And a partner is here's another $1 million term. It's a mutually owned engagement. It's not me who owns this. It's not you who owns this. We're in this together. And so if we embrace the partnership, then the ideation, the brainstorming is inclusive of everyone who's involved in this. And I believe that's where, organizations have to see their business partners, their BRMs, who are, they have to adopt them as business partners, because if it's impossible to truly bring value if you give me a third of the story, or even half of that matter. So yeah, I love that you said, you point out partner, because that's in the name of your company. I love that.
Thanks. And I think just going on that, you always have to be thinking about what's in it what's in it for both of us. Because if you approach these relationships as I'm delivering something to you, or you need to give something to me, it's never going to work. So it always has to be a win-win. You're both going to benefit from this, and so you have to take time to establish what that is.
Yeah.
And that's something I think with the Institute have this relationship strategy on a page, and I like that a lot of what they do is on a page, makes it simple. But I think that's something that's a lot of people miss, that when they're building these relationships, it feels odd maybe to formalize something that should be informal, these relationships. But I think if you establish those things up front, and you outline what it is that you can expect from me and what it is that I need from you, it makes the whole relationship and partnership work a lot more successfully.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with the strategy on the page. I think that's a powerful instrument to bring into your process. Do you have to bring everything that's out there? No, but there's some key tools that needs to be part of every engagement. And I believe, to your point, that the strategy on the page needs to be a leader in the toolbox, because it does establish and set expectations with which we can go forward.
Yeah. Are there any other kind of pearls of wisdom? We've spoken about things that you've changed over the years, but is there anything that maybe as new team members join, or things that when you talk to other BRMs, you say to them that you need to focus on this? Or is there anything you could share that you would, focus people's attention on to become a good BRM or good business partner?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It's twofold, actually. The first is to the BRM leaders, as fluid and as dynamic as it is being a great partner, the requirements and the demands change, and so we have to be very, we have to be very mindful of identifying those changes and promulgating them around the organization. I recommended to my previous leaders to do road shows often.
Okay.
Here's what's new within the BRM world. This is what we do. This is what we do. This is how we do it. And this is what we can do for you. And you take that around to that overarching, that high point is understood. And it really makes way for the BRM teams to get out there and work, because they can work under that. Kind of like a strategy on a page, but for the organization, from the team or the capability. So that's one thing that I would strongly encourage BRM leaders to do. The other thing for the team members or the subordinates within the team is, if that's not happening for you, then ask your leader if they can support you in doing that for your assigned business unit or your vertical or wherever you are, because at the end of the day, you own those relationships. Those are your relationships. And if nothing is there to kind of level the playing field, then as senior management level professionals, we must do it for ourselves. So, that's something that I would strongly recommend. Start at the top and see how you can explain what it is to be a business partner or BRM practitioner for that particular unit, and let that unit explain to you or teach you what they need from your capability.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And actually, we've had a few other BRMs on here that talked about running road shows in particular, which have had fantastic success. So it's really, and it's also another good opportunity to team build, to get out to meet colleagues that you might not meet otherwise. And this is something that Bruno mentioned in many episodes ago, that you should go out and meet people that you don't necessarily need to meet. Just stop people, ask them what they're doing, talk about what it is their challenges, and just get to meet people, because you never know, what information you're going to find from these people. Hearing about an issue that someone's got, you might be able to connect dots to other people and other opportunities. So I think that's a really nice thing to do is running these road shows. So I've got to ask, so what was your doctorate in exactly?
Yes, doctorate of public administration.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and so the company the research was in public leadership and workplaces. And so, yeah, so what I did, I conducted a phenomenological study, kind of like your podcast series. I went through and I was able to interview individuals on their experiences with their leadership within public bureaucracies and how that aligned within organizational success.
Okay. Wonderful. So there's probably a lot of information you've gathered from that you can, would directly benefit BRMs and people, building relationships. That's wonderful. Yeah. Are there any next steps? Or are you finished now? You strike me as a kind of someone who likes to continuously learn, but you
Yeah.
put the brakes on that filter.
Yeah, I know. I finished my doctorate program, and that's good. And then, right now there's some conversations with me to do some postdoctoral fellowship, some teaching, and just bringing a lot of that value back to my practice. So, aside from doing practitioner work, being able to just add value to BRMs who are open to it, to help them have a better experience as a BRM, because to me it's truly a fantastic role, whether you do it within an organization, and I'm learning how to do it outside of an organization, and it's really been satisfying for me. And I hope to be able to build my reputation as a good BRM and help others to follow in the footsteps that I've made, and I'm following in so many others.
Wonderful. Well, look, there's a lot people can be able to take from this episode, and I hope that people reach out and connect with you, so you can share directly with them your insights and experiences. I think that'd be fantastic. So I think that's we're kind of at the end of our episode now, Shellie. So I want to thank you for your time and for sharing those insights and experiences with us. I've really enjoyed it, and as with every episode, I'm learning a lot. So it's thoroughly enjoyable for me. But I hope the audience and our listeners can take a lot away from that as well. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. And thank you for having me. This is truly, an awesome thing that you and your company is doing. I hope that, the people, the audience takes a lot from this series that you put forth, because I know we have some phenomenal BRMs out there who bring a lot. I certainly learn a lot from every BRM, every business partner, every IT brand that I connect with, whether it be 5 minutes or 5 hours. And I hope, they pull, from this thought capital, the same that, you intend for them to pull and that I'll be able to pull from.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks again so much, Shellie. And I look forward to seeing where you go from here.
Thank you so much. Likewise. Stay in touch.
All the best. Thanks, Shellie.
Bye now.